Imagine waking up to a notification that your bank account just doubled while you slept. It's the dream every guru sells, with a private jet backdrop and a rented mansion. But behind that polished screen lies a calculated trap designed to exploit your urgency. You've seen the ads promising 6 figures in 30 days using a secret loophole or a new AI bot. Most people dive in headfirst, hoping to beat the system and escape the grind forever. Yet, statistics show that the faster a method claims to build wealth, the more likely it is to leave you completely broke. This is the velocity paradox, a hidden law of finance that the wealthy understand but never talk about. Today, we are stripping away the hype to reveal why your pursuit of speed is actually your biggest liability. If you want to stop losing and start building, you need to see the gears turning behind the curtain. To understand how we got here, we must look back at the origins of the quick wealth narrative. This isn't a modern invention of the internet era or a byproduct of social media algorithms. The blueprint for these scams was drafted over a century ago in the smoky offices of early industrial cities. In 1919, a man named Charles Ponzi promised investors a 50% profit in just 45 days. He claimed to be exploiting a simple loophole in international postal coupons that no one else had noticed. Thousands of people handed over their life savings, blinded by the sheer speed of the promised returns. Ponzi wasn't an outlier, he was a pioneer of a psychological exploit that still works today. While the mechanics have shifted from paper coupons to crypto tokens and dropshipping courses, the core bait remains the same. The promise of high reward with zero friction is a siren song that human nature cannot seem to resist. We now live in an era of extreme instant gratification where waiting is often viewed as a personal failure. Social media feeds are flooded with young influencers claiming they've cracked the code to infinite passive income. This creates a distorted reality where slow, steady growth feels like a waste of time. Our brains are biologically wired to seek the path of least resistance at all costs. Evolution favored the ancestor who found the most calories with the least amount of physical effort. Modern scammers understand this primal drive and weaponize it against your rational financial judgment. They often frame the traditional path of education and career growth as the real scam to make their shortcuts look legitimate. By devaluing the concept of hard work, they create a vacuum that only their secret system can fill. It is a masterful exercise in narrative manipulation designed to bypass your critical thinking. Behind every overnight success story used in a promotional ad, there is a massive missing chapter of context. You are shown the finish line but never the starting blocks or the thousands of people who fell before reaching the end. This selective storytelling is the primary engine that keeps the velocity paradox running. To understand why these schemes eventually collapse, we have to look at the math they try to hide. True wealth creation requires a structural foundation that speed simply cannot provide. It is time to examine the fundamental flaws that make these shortcuts a mathematical impossibility for the average person. These mathematical flaws aren't a recent invention or a glitch in modern digital marketing. They are rooted in a centuries-old cycle of speculative bubbles and predatory promises that target the hopeful. Every generation faces its own version of the South Sea bubble or tulip mania under a different, shinier name. In the early 20th century, Charles Ponzi didn't just create a scam, he perfected a psychological blueprint for exploitation. He realized that most people are willing to bypass their common sense if the promised reward is high enough. This fundamental desire for effortless gain is the raw fuel that powers every modern crypto rug pull or fake trading bot. Our biology is partly to blame for why we fall for these sophisticated traps over and over again. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to seek the path of least resistance to conserve energy and resources. When a guru promises a secret loophole, your logical mind often takes a backseat to your primal survival instincts. From a technical standpoint, these schemes always ignore the ironclad relationship between risk and reward. To generate 1,000% return in a single month, you must expose your capital to a near-certain chance of total wipeout. The math dictates that eventually the house always wins because the probability of failure is baked into the speed. Modern gurus have upgraded the old playbook by using social media to create a false sense of inevitability. They flood your feed with rented luxury and paid testimonials to silence your inner critic and spark intense FOMO. This manufactured social proof makes the impossible seem like a proven formula that everyone else is already using. Most of these methods rely on temporary market inefficiencies or the outright exploitation of digital platform terms. They aren't building real businesses, they are building fragile houses of cards on top of shifting sand. Once the platform patches the hole or the market corrects itself, the entire income stream vanishes instantly. Real, sustainable wealth has historically been built on the slow accumulation of tangible value and specialized skills. This traditional approach is often ignored because it lacks the dopamine hit of a potential lottery win. However, the history of finance shows that the unsexy path is the only one with a high survival rate. Understanding this historical and psychological backdrop is the first step toward reclaiming your financial agency. We have to stop looking for the secret door and start looking at the structural integrity of the building itself. Only by deconstructing the mechanics of the scam can we see the true path to lasting prosperity. But deconstructing the scam is only the first step in surviving the inevitable fallout. The real crisis begins when the excitement of the promise meets the cold, hard wall of reality. This is the moment the loophole closes and the shiny facade starts to crack under the weight of its own lies. It usually starts with a minor delay in a withdrawal or a sudden change in a platform's algorithm. You tell yourself it's just a temporary glitch, a small hurdle on your way to millions. But deep down, a feeling of dread begins to settle in as the numbers on your screen stop reflecting your actual bank balance. When the system starts to fail, the gurus don't offer solutions, they offer excuses or expensive inner circle upgrades. They shift the blame onto your mindset or your supposed lack of commitment to the failing process. This psychological pivot is designed to keep you paying while the ship is already halfway underwater. The mechanics of the velocity paradox are unforgiving and eventually demand their payment in full. You cannot sustain exponential growth without an underlying foundation of real-world value or production. Without a product or service that people actually need, the entire structure is just a sophisticated game of financial hot potato. Watching your hard-earned savings evaporate in a matter of hours is a trauma that no digital course prepares you for. The shame of being tricked often keeps people silent, allowing the cycle to continue for the next wave of victims. This collective silence is the most valuable asset the scammers have in their arsenal. This is the irreversible turning point where you realize that the shortcut was actually the longest road possible. You've spent months or years chasing a ghost while your peers built something tangible and lasting. The realization is bitter, but it is the necessary fire that burns away the illusions of easy wealth. As more participants try to exit the scheme at once, the liquidity vanishes and the market collapses into a black hole. The passive income stream you were promised turns out to be a liability that requires more of your time and money just to maintain. The game is over, and the house has already moved on to a new digital zip code. In the wreckage of these failed promises, a fundamental truth begins to emerge from the dust. If speed was the poison that killed your progress, then the solution must lie in the very thing you were taught to avoid. To truly build, we must look away from the flashing lights and toward the unsexy mechanics of real, compounding growth. This realization hits like a cold wave, stripping away the comforting lies of the shortcut culture. You suddenly see that every hour spent chasing a loophole was an hour stolen from building a foundation that actually lasts. The shiny facade of the digital gold rush has finally cracked, leaving you standing in the middle of a financial wasteland. The crisis isn't just about the money lost, it's about the total erosion of your trust in the process. You find yourself at a crossroads where the old maps lead to dead ends and the new path looks impossibly steep. This is the moment where most people give up entirely, convinced that the game is rigged against them from the start. But the game isn't rigged, it's simply governed by laws that the gurus intentionally taught you to ignore. You begin to notice a disturbing pattern where the most successful people you know are doing the exact opposite of what the ads suggest. They aren't looking for the next big thing, but rather doubling down on the fundamentals that never go out of style. This discovery marks an irreversible shift in your perspective on how value is actually created in the modern economy. You realize that while you were looking for a secret key, the door was never locked, it just required a heavy lift to open. The friction you once tried to avoid is actually the very thing that creates the heat necessary for long-term growth. The internal conflict intensifies as you realize that your greatest enemy isn't the scammer, but your own impatience. Every time you reach for a quick fix, you are effectively betting against your future self for a momentary dopamine hit. Breaking this cycle requires a radical psychological overhaul that most people are simply too terrified to attempt. As you shed the skin of the desperate seeker, the true nature of the velocity paradox becomes undeniable. The faster you try to run toward wealth without a vehicle built for speed, the more likely you are to crash before the first turn. Now, the only question that remains is whether you have the courage to slow down enough to actually get ahead. Starting the journey toward real skills feels like walking into a cold wind after being in a heated room. You decide to pick up a foundational skill like data analysis or technical writing, thinking the transition will be linear. But the immediate lack of the overnight feedback loop you've been conditioned to expect creates a jarring mental friction. The first major obstacle isn't the complexity of the material, but the crushing weight of the mundane. Unlike the flashy dashboards of a crypto app, learning a real trade offers no flashing lights or instant profit notifications. You find yourself staring at a blank screen, wondering if you've simply traded one form of failure for another. As you struggle through the basics, the ghosts of your past habits begin to haunt your digital environment. You see a new trend emerging, a different coin or a new AI bot, and the temptation to pivot back to the shortcut becomes overwhelming. Your brain screams that you are falling behind while others are still winning the lottery you just walked away from. You soon discover that the unsexy skills required for true wealth have a much steeper learning curve than the experts ever admitted. There is a profound difference between understanding a concept and being able to charge a premium for its execution. This gap is where most people quit, realizing that competence cannot be downloaded in a weekend. In your rush to see progress, you likely make the classic mistake of overinvesting in tools rather than practice. You might buy the most expensive software or a prestigious certification, hoping the purchase itself will act as a proxy for actual work. This is just another version of the shortcut mentality, a lingering shadow of the get-rich-quick ghost. When you finally try to offer your fledgling services to the world, the market often responds with a deafening silence. You realize that having a skill is only half the battle, the other half is proving its value to a skeptical audience. This initial rejection feels personal, making the easy promises of the scammers look more attractive than ever before. You might eventually hit a point where you think you know enough to scale, only to be humbled by a real professional. This encounter reveals the vast ocean of nuance you didn't even know existed when you started your journey. It is the moment you realize that unsexy doesn't just mean boring, it means rigorous, disciplined, and deeply technical. Through these early failures, a new hypothesis begins to take shape regarding the nature of lasting value. You start to suspect that the difficulty of the task is exactly what creates the moat around your future income. If the path were easy, the profit would have already been competed away by the very crowds you are trying to escape. Trying to build a real skill feels like walking through waist-deep mud after months of sprinting on a treadmill. You pick a discipline, perhaps data analysis or high-stakes negotiation, and quickly realize your brain has been softened by the promise of automation. The first few weeks are a brutal exercise in intellectual humility as you struggle to grasp concepts that don't fit into a 10-minute YouTube tutorial. You might seek out a mentor, someone who has spent decades in the trenches without ever launching a flashy masterclass. They don't talk about hacks or passive income, but instead focus on market cycles, risk mitigation, and the boring math of compound interest. Their skepticism of your previous methods is a cold shower that forces you to confront exactly how much time you have actually wasted. As you attempt to apply these new, grounded principles, you face a different kind of failure, the friction of the real market. Unlike the simulated success of a demo account or a dropshipping dashboard, real clients and real markets have zero tolerance for amateur mistakes. Every error now has a tangible cost, and there is no reset button or refund policy for your lost time and effort. Through these setbacks, you start to notice something interesting about the people who are actually winning. They are rarely the loudest voices in the room, but they possess a level of specialized knowledge that acts as a barrier to entry for everyone else. This is your first real discovery. The more painful a skill is to acquire, the more protected your future income becomes from the next wave of scammers. Even with this new clarity, the siren song of the quick fix doesn't just disappear overnight. You see an old acquaintance post a screenshot of a massive crypto gain, and for a split second, your resolve wavers. The psychological battle becomes a daily grind between the desire for instant validation and the logical understanding of long-term stability. You begin to hypothesize that wealth isn't a destination you arrive at, but a byproduct of the person you become while solving difficult problems. This shift changes your focus from how much you can make today to how much more valuable you are becoming. It is a slow, agonizing transformation, but for the first time, the ground beneath your feet feels solid instead of like shifting sand. The realization that wealth is a byproduct of character and problem solving is a bitter pill to swallow for a culture addicted to speed. You start to look at the gurus not as mentors, but as architects of a sophisticated psychological trap designed to exploit your biological impatience. This confrontation isn't just external, it is a war between your logical mind and the dopamine-seeking parts of your brain. When you look closer at the mechanics of these schemes, the math simply refuses to add up. Most of these high-velocity models rely on a constant influx of new capital rather than the creation of actual economic value. You begin to see the difference between a business that solves a problem and a machine that merely moves money from the many to the few. Investigating the backgrounds of those who sell these shortcuts often reveals a trail of failed ventures and rebranded identities. They are not selling you a system for wealth, they are selling you the image of wealth to fund their own lifestyle. The luxury cars and private jets are often rented props used to trigger your envy and bypass your critical thinking. This industry thrives on the survivorship bias, highlighting the one person who got lucky while ignoring the thousands who lost everything. They frame your failure as a lack of mindset or hustle to keep you from questioning the flawed logic of the system itself. It is a brilliant form of gaslighting that turns your financial loss into a personal moral failing. In contrast, the unsexy path is built on the reality of market demand and the scarcity of specialized talent. While the crowd is chasing the latest algorithm hack, the true professionals are mastering the fundamentals of psychology, economics, and logistics. These skills do not depreciate when a platform changes its rules or a bubble finally bursts. Historical data shows that the most consistent wealth is generated through the ownership of productive assets and the mastery of high-value crafts. There is no historical precedent for a mass-market shortcut that creates lasting prosperity for everyone who buys a digital course. Real economic growth is a slow, grinding process of compounding small advantages over long periods of time. The velocity paradox forces you to choose between the illusion of a sprint and the reality of a marathon. Every time you try to skip a step, you create a structural weakness in your financial foundation that will eventually lead to a collapse. The deeper you go into this investigation, the more you realize that the boring path is actually the most radical act of rebellion. As you strip away the layers of marketing hype, you are left with a stark choice about your future. You can continue to gamble on the promises of strangers, or you can begin the difficult work of building something that actually belongs to you. The confrontation is over, and the time has come to look at the specific blueprints for a life built on solid ground. The blueprints for this solid ground don't look like the colorful infographics you see on social media. They are often written in the dry language of risk management and operational efficiency, far removed from the hype of a digital gold rush. You must confront the reality that true wealth is built in the shadows of the mundane, where the only audience is your own discipline. When we investigate the business models of those selling shortcuts, a disturbing symmetry emerges between their success and your failure. Their revenue isn't derived from the methods they teach, but from the act of teaching the method itself to an endless stream of hopeful newcomers. This parasitic relationship relies on your continued belief that a secret key exists, hidden just behind the next paywall. We often mistake complexity for sophistication, falling for intricate schemes that promise to outsmart the market. In reality, the most resilient financial structures are deceptively simple and rely on factors that are entirely within your control. The conflict deepens when you realize that the hardest part isn't understanding the math, but managing the emotional volatility of a slow ascent. Consider the defensive moat created by specialized knowledge that takes years, not weeks, to master. This barrier to entry is your greatest protection against the commoditization of your labor and the volatility of speculative bubbles. While others are chasing the latest trend, you are deepening your expertise in a field that the world actually needs to function. The struggle is ultimately a war against the dopamine-driven feedback loops that have been hardwired into our modern digital existence. Breaking free requires a conscious rejection of the instant gratification that fuels every scam and every high-risk gamble. It is a psychological deconstruction of what it means to be successful in a world that values the appearance of wealth over the substance of it. As we peel back the final layers of this investigation, the distinction between a gambler and a builder becomes painfully clear. One relies on the hope of a favorable wind, while the other focuses on the integrity of the sails and the strength of the hull. We are now ready to examine the specific, unsexy mechanics that turn small, consistent efforts into an unstoppable force of compounding value. You finally reach a point where you think the lesson is fully internalized. You've purged the scammers from your feed, embraced the boredom of real work, and accepted that your wealth will be a slow-motion achievement. It feels like the end of the story, a quiet resolution where the hero chooses the honest, difficult path over the flashy shortcut. But as the weeks turn into months, the romanticism of the grind begins to evaporate into a cold, hard exhaustion. The unsexy skills you're building are difficult to master, and the market's response remains lukewarm at best. You start to realize that being a builder is often lonelier and more taxing than being a gambler ever was. Looking at your progress, the numbers feel insulting compared to the effort you've poured into the foundation. The compounding effect is so slow that it's practically invisible to the naked eye, leaving you to wonder if you've simply traded one delusion for another. It feels as though you've chosen a path that leads to the same destination of mediocrity, just with more sweat and less hope. This is the moment where most people quietly retreat back to their old lives, convinced that the game is rigged regardless of the strategy. You conclude that perhaps the gurus and the professionals are just two sides of the same cynical coin, both selling a version of a dream that doesn't exist for the average person. The fire that drove your investigation starts to flicker out, replaced by a heavy sense of defeat. If this were a typical story, this would be the final chapter, a cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition and the reality of economic stagnation. You would accept your place in the machine, grateful for the stability but forever mourning the potential you thought you had. The investigation seems closed, the evidence is in, and the verdict is a resounding silence. Yet, just as you are ready to walk away, a glaring inconsistency emerges from the wreckage of your failed expectations. You revisit the data of those who actually succeeded and notice a recurring anomaly that your previous analysis completely overlooked. There is a specific moment in every builder's journey that doesn't follow the rules of linear growth or slow compounding. You realize that the unsexy path has a hidden trapdoor, a structural flaw that can keep you running in place for a lifetime if you don't know it's there. The discipline and the skills are necessary, but they are not sufficient to break the gravity of the middle class. There is a third variable, a catalyst that turns a slow crawl into a vertical ascent without the fragility of a scam. This revelation fundamentally shifts the entire premise of the velocity paradox we've been exploring. It suggests that the real secret isn't just about how fast you go, but about a specific type of leverage that is invisible to the untrained eye. We are not done yet, because everything you thought you knew about the real alternative is about to be dismantled. This hidden trapdoor is the realization that being a highly skilled worker is often just a more comfortable version of the same rat race. You've traded the volatility of the scam for the predictable exhaustion of a high-end career that still demands your presence to function. It feels like a dead end, leaving you to wonder if the unsexy path was just another lie sold by a different set of intellectuals. You find yourself working 80 hours a week, mastering complex systems, yet your net worth barely moves the needle after taxes and inflation. The math of compounding interest, while technically true, feels like a cruel joke when the timeline spans 4 decades of your best years. You have the skills and the discipline, but you still lack the one thing that actually creates a gap between your time and your income. This is the point where most people finally break and return to the gambling tables of the crypto markets or the latest AI hype. They conclude that if the slow way is this painful and the fast way is a scam, then perhaps financial freedom is a myth designed to keep the wheels of the economy turning. The cynicism sets in, and you begin to accept a life of quiet desperation as the only logical outcome. We are forced to admit an uncomfortable truth: hard work and specialized skills are not a guarantee of wealth, they are merely the entry fee. Without a way to multiply your output, you are simply a more expensive cog in a much larger machine. It seems the investigation has reached its somber conclusion, proving that the velocity paradox is a trap no matter which side you choose. It's tempting to close the book here and tell you to just be grateful for what you have and stop chasing ghosts. The world is full of talented, disciplined people who die broke because they followed the rules of the unsexy path to the letter. If this is the end of the road, then the gurus won by default because at least they offered a dream worth having. But as we look closer at the wreckage of this conclusion, a final, jarring anomaly appears in the data. We've been treating skills and time as a linear equation, ignoring a massive force that the ultra-wealthy use to bypass the grind without the fragility of a gamble. This isn't a shortcut or a scam, but a fundamental law of physics applied to economics that changes the entire definition of effort. This law is the principle of leverage, the mechanical advantage that allows a small force to move a massive object. In the economic world, leverage is the bridge between the linear grind of the worker and the exponential growth of the builder. It is the missing piece of the velocity paradox that explains how wealth can be generated quickly without the catastrophic risk of a scam. Unlike the high-interest debt used by gamblers, true leverage comes in forms that don't require anyone's permission to use. We are talking about the replication of your effort through code and media, where the cost of reproduction is effectively zero. This is how a single person can serve 1 million customers while they sleep, breaking the ancient link between hours worked and dollars earned. The gurus fail because they sell you the result of leverage without teaching you how to build the machine that generates it. They want you to use their leverage to make them richer, rather than creating your own assets that compound independently. When you own the means of replication, you are no longer a cog in the machine, you are the architect of the factory itself. This is where those boring, unsexy skills finally reveal their true purpose as the fuel for your leverage. A master of psychology uses media to influence at scale, while a master of logistics uses code to automate complex global systems. Your expertise is the fulcrum, and leverage is the long lever that transforms your modest effort into a world-changing force. When you apply leverage to a foundation of high-value skills, the growth curve stops being a flat line and starts to look like a vertical wall. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme because the building of the lever takes years of quiet, disciplined work. However, once the lever is in place, the speed of wealth accumulation surpasses anything a scam could ever promise. The velocity paradox is solved because this speed is built on structural integrity rather than speculative hope. You aren't betting on a coin flip, you are betting on the mathematical certainty of a scalable system that solves a real market need. The risk of capital loss is minimized because your primary investment was the sweat equity used to develop the lever. This realization shifts your focus from how you can work harder to how you can make your work more scalable. You stop looking for shortcuts and start looking for bottlenecks in your current model that prevent your effort from reaching more people. It is a profound psychological transformation that replaces the desperation of the gambler with the cold precision of an engineer. We have finally arrived at the heart of the truth, where the illusions of the gurus and the limitations of the grind both fall away. The path to genuine wealth is now clear, stripped of its mystery and its false promises of effortless gain. This is the moment where the investigation ends and your actual construction begins, armed with the only blueprint that actually works in the real world. The force you've been missing is the power of asymmetric leverage, the ability to finally decouple your income from your finite hours. While the gambler bets on luck and the worker bets on time, the builder bets on systems that operate independently of their physical presence. This is the only way to solve the velocity paradox without risking the total capital loss inherent in every scam. True wealth is generated when your specialized skills are encoded into products, media, or automated processes that can be replicated at zero marginal cost. You stop selling your labor and start selling the results of your judgment to an audience of millions. This transition transforms your efforts from a linear treadmill into an exponential engine that compounds even while you sleep. This is where the gurus intentionally mislead you. They sell the illusion of the output without teaching you how to construct the underlying engine. They want you to buy their finished lifestyle rather than showing you how to capture real value from the market's deepest problems. Genuine leverage requires the very foundation of character and discipline you were tempted to abandon during the exhaustion of the grind. The velocity paradox is finally resolved when you realize that speed is a consequence of architecture, not raw intensity. You don't get rich by moving faster, but by building a vehicle that is capable of high speeds without structural failure. By focusing on the integrity of your systems, you create a momentum that eventually mimics the get-rich-quick dream, but with a stability that is functionally unbreakable. Suddenly, the boring tasks of risk management and operational efficiency become the most vital parts of your strategic vision. You see them not as administrative chores, but as the precision tuning of a high-performance machine designed to serve a global market. The unsexy path was never about settling for mediocrity. It was about preparing for a scale that the impatient crowd is simply too distracted to imagine. Your investigation is complete, and the evidence is undeniable. The only shortcut that exists is the one you build yourself through the compounding of leveraged judgment. The world will continue to chase the latest hype and the next digital gold rush, but you are now operating on a different frequency entirely. It is time to stop watching the clock and start building the systems that will eventually make the concept of an hourly wage irrelevant. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you interact with the world. You no longer see a job market, but a landscape of inefficiencies waiting for a system to solve them. The anxiety of the get-rich-quick cycle is replaced by a quiet, focused confidence in your own architectural ability. Your legacy is no longer tied to the volatility of a trend or the whims of a guru. By building on the bedrock of unsexy skills and scalable leverage, you create a fortress that survives economic winters. You aren't just accumulating currency, you are accumulating the freedom to dictate the terms of your own existence. The true impact of this approach extends far beyond your personal bank account. When you solve problems at scale, you provide genuine value that moves the needle for thousands, or even millions, of people. This is the ultimate irony. By ignoring the selfish shortcuts to wealth, you end up creating the most significant contribution to the world around you. The velocity paradox finally loses its power over you because you've mastered the art of patience and the science of scale. You understand that the fastest way to wealth is actually the most deliberate one, built on a foundation that cannot be shaken. The investigation is closed, and the verdict is clear: sustainable speed is a byproduct of structural excellence. Of course, the world will never stop trying to sell you a faster way. New technologies and new markets will always birth a fresh generation of charlatans promising the moon for the price of a masterclass. But you are now immune to the siren song of the shortcut, knowing that anything built on air will eventually return to the earth. Now that you have the blueprint for the engine, the question becomes how to find the high-octane fuel required to keep it running indefinitely. Building the system is only half the battle. Maintaining the psychological edge to navigate the coming complexity is where the real masters are forged. This leads us to a deeper exploration of the cognitive frameworks that separate the one-hit wonders from the generational titans.